The first gunshot of the morning echoed through the dusty streets of Laredo, Texas. But Wilhelmina Willa Blackwood barely flinched as she continued to hang the freshly laundered sheets on the clothesline behind the town's only hotel. At 24, she had grown accustomed to the sound of violence that occasionally punctuated life in this border town along the Rio Grande. The year was 1873, and Laredo was growing rapidly thanks to the newly constructed railroad, bringing with it a steady stream of travelers, businessmen, and trouble. Willa wiped the perspiration from her brow with the back of her hand and glanced toward the commotion down the street. Another brawl at Shepherd's saloon, no doubt. She had no time for such distractions. As the hotel's housekeeper, laundress, and occasional cook, her days were filled with endless chores that kept her from dwelling on the loneliness that had become her constant companion since her parents' passing 3 years prior. Miss Blackwood called a voice from the back door of the hotel. It was Mrs. Hollister, the owner's wife, her plump face flushed with excitement. "There's a wounded man just arrived. Mr. Hollister says we need to prepare a room right away." Willa sighed, abandoning the half-hung laundry. "Is the doctor coming?" "He's been sent for, but you know how he gets when he's 3 sheets to the wind this early." Mrs. Hollister wrung her hands on her apron. "The poor man's bleeding something terrible." Gathering her skirts, Willa hurried inside, quickly assembling clean linens and a basin of water. The Hollister Hotel wasn't the grandest establishment in Laredo, but it had a reputation for cleanliness and honest dealings, which kept a steady stream of respectable travelers passing through its doors. She wasn't prepared for the sight that greeted her in the small parlor. A tall man slumped in a chair, his broad shoulders hunched forward, a crimson stain spreading across his left side. His dust-covered clothes marked him as a traveler, though the quality of his attire suggested he wasn't an ordinary drifter. A magnificent black Stetson lay on the table beside him, and despite his pallor, Willa couldn't help but notice the strong line of his jaw, partially hidden beneath several days' worth of stubble. "Mr. Hollister says you're to have room 3, Willa announced, stepping forward. "Can you walk, or shall I fetch help?" The stranger lifted his head, and Willa found herself caught in the steady gaze of the most striking blue eyes she'd ever seen. They reminded her of the Texas sky after a storm had cleared. "I can manage, madam," he replied, his voice deep and strained. He attempted to stand but swayed dangerously. Without hesitation, Willa moved to his side, allowing him to lean on her as they made their slow progress up the narrow stairs. She could feel the heat radiating from him, smell the mixture of sweat, leather, and something uniquely masculine that made her cheeks flush with an unfamiliar warmth. "Name's Wade," he managed between labored breaths as they reached the landing. "Wade Coleman." "Wilhelmina Blackwood," she replied automatically. "Though most folks call me Willa." They reached room 3, and Willa helped him to the bed, where he collapsed with a groan. Blood had soaked through his shirt and vest, and Willa's practiced eye could tell the wound needed immediate attention. "Mr. Coleman, I need to look at that wound," she said firmly, setting down her supplies. "The doctor may be a while." His eyes, clouded with pain, met hers. "You know what you're doing. I've patched up my share of injuries. My father was the doctor in Corpus Christi before we moved here." She didn't add that she had assisted him since she was 12 years old, learning more about medicine than most proper young ladies were ever supposed to know. Wade nodded weakly, and Willa set to work with efficient movements, cutting away his shirt to reveal a nasty gash along his ribs. The wound was deep but clean, likely from a knife rather than a bullet. "Bushwhackers," Wade explained through gritted teeth as she cleaned the wound. "3 of them, just outside town, seemed mighty interested in my saddlebags. Did they get what they were after?" Willa asked, preparing a needle and thread. A ghost of a smile crossed his pained features. "No, madam, they got a taste of my colt instead." Willa worked silently for several minutes, her nimble fingers stitching the wound closed while Wade endured the pain with only the occasional sharp intake of breath. When she finally tied off the last stitch, she became acutely aware of his gaze on her face. "You've got steady hands, Miss Blackwood," he murmured. "Willa," she corrected automatically, then flushed at her impropriety. "I mean, Willa," he repeated, and something about the way her name sounded in his mouth made her heart flutter strangely. "I'm much obliged." She busied herself with bandaging his torso, trying to ignore the firm muscles beneath her fingertips. "What brings you to Laredo, Mr. Coleman? Beyond getting yourself stabbed, that is." A shadow crossed his face. "Business. I'm looking to buy some land hereabouts." Before Willa could inquire further, the door burst open to reveal Dr. Fenton, red-faced and disheveled, his medical bag clutched in one hand. The sour smell of whiskey preceded him into the room. "Well now, what have we here?" the doctor boomed, swaying slightly. Willa straightened, wiping her bloodied hands on a cloth. "Knife wound to the ribs, doctor. I've cleaned and sutured it." Dr. Fenton peered at her work with bleary eyes, then nodded. "Good job, girl. Your father taught you well." He turned to Wade. "You're in good hands with this one. Best nurse this side of the Mississippi, I'd wager." Willa felt herself blushing again under Wade's appraising gaze. "I'll leave you to rest, Mr. Coleman. Ring the bell if you need anything." As she gathered her supplies to leave, Wade's hand caught her wrist, his touch surprisingly gentle. "Thank you, Willa." She nodded briskly and hurried from the room, her heart racing for reasons she couldn't quite explain. Something about Wade Coleman unsettled her in ways both frightening and exhilarating. Over the next few days, Willa found herself making excuses to check on their injured guest more often than strictly necessary. Wade Coleman was unlike any man she'd met in Laredo. He was educated and well-spoken, with manners that spoke of a good upbringing. Yet there was something dangerous about him, too, a hardness in his eyes that suggested he'd seen his share of trouble. By the fourth day, he was well enough to come downstairs for meals, though he moved carefully to avoid pulling his stitches. Willa observed him from the kitchen doorway as he conversed easily with the other hotel guests, charming misses. Hollister with his courteous manner and even drawing a rare smile from Mr. Hollister with some shared joke. "Handsome devil, isn't he?" remarked Rosa, the kitchen girl, as she appeared beside Willa with a stack of dirty plates. Willa sniffed dismissively. "I hadn't noticed," Rosa laughed. "Of course not. That's why you've burned the biscuits twice this week." Willa was saved from responding when Wade looked up and caught her eye across the dining room. He smiled, a warm, genuine expression that seemed to transform his face, and Willa felt that strange flutter in her chest again. That evening, as Willa was returning from delivering fresh towels to a guest, she nearly collided with Wade in the upstairs hallway. He steadied her with a hand on her elbow, and she became acutely aware of their proximity in the narrow space. "Excuse me, Mr. Coleman," she said, taking a step back. "I didn't see you there. No harm done." His eyes studied her face with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "I was hoping to speak with you, actually. I wanted to thank you properly for your care." "It was nothing," Willa insisted. "Just doing my job. It was considerably more than nothing to me." He paused, seeming to search for words. "I wonder if you might show me around Laredo tomorrow. I'm well enough to explore, and I could use a knowledgeable guide if I'm to consider buying property here." Willa hesitated. It wasn't proper for an unmarried woman to spend time alone with a man she barely knew, but something about Wade Coleman made her want to set aside propriety just this once. "I have tomorrow afternoon free," she heard herself saying, "after the midday meal." The genuine pleasure that lit his face was worth whatever gossip might follow. "I'll look forward to it." The next day dawned clear and mild, a perfect spring afternoon in South Texas. Willa took more care than usual with her appearance, donning her best day dress of sage green calico and pinning her chestnut hair into a neat coil at the nape of her neck. She told herself it was simply because she would be representing the hotel to a potential business investor in the area, but the butterflies in her stomach suggested otherwise. Wade was waiting for her in the hotel lobby, dressed in clean clothes that emphasized his broad shoulders and lean frame. His dark hair was neatly combed, and he'd trimmed his beard to a more civilized length. With his injury hidden beneath his clothes, he looked every inch the successful businessman, save for the pistol strapped to his hip, a reminder that in Laredo, danger was never far away. "You look lovely," he said simply, offering his arm. Their tour of Laredo began with the main street, where Willa pointed out the various businesses and their owners, sharing tidbits of local gossip that made Wade chuckle. They visited the newly constructed courthouse, a symbol of Laredo's growing importance, and strolled along the banks of the Rio Grande, where Mexican vendors called out their wares from across the water. "Have you lived in Laredo long?" Wade asked as they paused to watch a steamboat making its way upriver. 3 years, Willa replied. "We came after my father received an offer to partner with Dr. Fenton. Unfortunately, both my parents succumbed to typhoid fever just 6 months after we arrived." She swallowed hard against the familiar ache of loss. "I stayed on because I had nowhere else to go, and Mrs. Hollister needed help at the hotel." Wade's gaze was sympathetic. "No other family," Willa shook her head. "None that I know of. My father was estranged from his people back east, and my mother's family died in the war." They walked in companionable silence for a while, eventually finding themselves at the edge of town where new construction was underway. "This is where most of the development is happening," Willa explained. "The railroad has brought new opportunities. Mr. Hollister says Laredo will double in size within 5 years. Wade nodded thoughtfully. "That's what I'm counting on. I'm looking at a parcel about 3 miles north, good water access, room for cattle and horses. I've had my fill of wandering." "You've traveled extensively?" Willa asked, curious about this man who seemed both familiar and mysterious. A shadow crossed his face. "Too extensively. After the war, I couldn't settle. Rode with a cattle outfit for a while, then tried my hand at prospecting in Colorado." He shrugged. "Made enough to buy some land, but never found a place that felt right. Until now, perhaps." There was something in his tone, a warmth that made Willa wonder if he was speaking of Laredo or something else entirely. The thought sent a thrill through her that she quickly suppressed. As the sun began to set, they made their way back toward the hotel, but Wade surprised her by suggesting dinner at the new restaurant that had opened near the train station. It was a far more respectable establishment than the saloons that dominated Laredo's nightlife, and Willa found herself agreeing despite knowing it would fuel the town's gossip mill. The restaurant was modest by big city standards, but represented the height of sophistication for Laredo. They were seated at a small table near a window, and Wade ordered for them, both after consulting with Willa on her preferences. The proprietor, recognizing Willa, raised an eyebrow at seeing the hotel's housekeeper dining with such a distinguished-looking gentleman, but he was too professional to comment. "Tell me about your dream," Wade said after their food arrived. "Surely you don't plan to work at the hotel forever." Willa hesitated, unused to anyone taking an interest in her aspirations. "I had hoped to follow in my father's footsteps someday," she admitted. "He was training me informally, though he knew a woman could never be officially recognized as a doctor. Why not open your own practice?" Wade suggested, "There must be many women who would prefer a female healer." Willa smiled ruefully. "It takes money to establish a practice, Mr. Coleman, and respectability. A woman alone has limited options in that regard." "Wade," he corrected. "And you strike me as a woman who could overcome such obstacles if given half a chance." Their conversation flowed easily throughout the meal, touching on books they had both read, places Wade had visited, and Willa's childhood in Corpus Christi. By the time they finished their coffee, Willa realized with a start that the restaurant had nearly emptied, and they had been talking for over 2 hours. "I should get back," she said reluctantly. "Mrs. Hollister will wonder what's become of me." The walk back to the hotel was too short for Willa's liking. Wade's presence beside her felt right in a way she couldn't articulate, and the thought of returning to her solitary room filled her with an unexpected melancholy. At the hotel entrance, Wade paused, taking both her hands in his. "Thank you for today, Willa. It's been a long time since I've enjoyed someone's company so much." The sincerity in his voice made her throat tight with emotion. "The pleasure was mine," she managed. For a moment, she thought he might kiss her, and a part of her desperately wanted him to. Instead, he raised her hand to his lips, the gesture both proper and somehow more intimate than a kiss would have been. "Good night," he murmured, his breath warm against her skin. "Good night," she echoed, before slipping inside, her heart racing and her mind filled with possibilities she had never before allowed herself to contemplate. Over the next 2 weeks, Wade became a regular fixture at the Hollister Hotel, even after his wound had healed enough for him to move freely. He made trips to examine the property he was considering purchasing, consulted with lawyers about the transaction, and spent every free moment in Willa's company. They took afternoon walks when her duties permitted, shared meals in the hotel dining room under Mrs. Hollister's increasingly approving eye, and once even attended a traveling theater company's performance together. Willa knew she was falling in love with Wade Coleman. The realization terrified and elated her in equal measure. He was unlike any of the local men who had occasionally shown interest in her, more thoughtful, more considerate of her opinions, and he seemed genuinely fascinated by her medical knowledge rather than put off by it. Yet she sensed that Wade was holding something back. Sometimes she would catch him watching her with an expression of such profound sadness that it made her heart ache, though it would vanish the moment he realized she had noticed. He spoke freely of his travels and adventures, but rarely mentioned his family or his life before the war. The truth emerged on a warm evening as they sat on the hotel's small back porch, watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk. Wade had been quiet all day, preoccupied with thoughts he wouldn't share, and Willa had finally gathered the courage to ask what troubled him. "I received word today that the land sale is complete," he said after a long silence. "I officially own 200 acres of Texas." "That's wonderful news," Willa responded, puzzled by his somber tone. "Isn't it what you wanted?" Wade turned to face her, his expression serious. "It is. But now that I've put down roots, there are things you need to know about me, Willa, things that might change how you see me." Willa's heart began to pound. "Whatever it is, you can tell me." He took a deep breath. "Before the war, I was engaged to be married to a girl back in Virginia. Elizabeth was her name. When the fighting started, I joined up with the Confederate cavalry, convinced I was defending our way of life." He gave a bitter laugh. "Young and foolish I was." Willa remained silent, sensing he needed to tell his story without interruption. 2 years in, I took a bullet at Chancellorsville, right through the lower abdomen." His hand unconsciously moved to his midsection. "I nearly died, but a Union doctor who'd been captured saved my life. He also told me what the damage meant." Wade's eyes met hers, raw with old pain. "I cannot father children, Willa. That bullet made sure of that." Understanding dawned on Willa. "And Elizabeth, I wrote to her from the hospital, releasing her from our engagement, told her to find someone who could give her the family she deserved." His voice grew husky. "She married my cousin before I even made it home from the war." Willa reached out, covering his hand with hers. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. It was a long time ago." He turned his hand to clasp hers. "But you deserve to know. Before what?" Wade's eyes searched her face. "Before I ask if you might consider a future with a man who can never give you children. I've grown to care for you, Willa, more than I thought possible, but I understand if that's a future you can't accept." Willa's mind raced. Children had always been part of the vague someday she imagined, a home filled with little ones she would love and nurture. Yet in that moment, faced with the possibility of losing Wade, she realized that some dreams could change, evolve into something different but no less meaningful. "Wade," she said softly, squeezing his hand. "There are many ways to build a family, many children who need homes and love." Hope flickered in his eyes. "You wouldn't resent me for what I can't give you." "How could I resent the man who's given me something I thought I'd lost forever?" She moved closer to him on the bench. Hope, companionship, the chance to be seen for who I truly am. Wade's hand came up to cup her cheek. You're sure? In answer, Willa leaned forward and pressed her lips to his, her first kiss given freely and without reservation. Wade responded with gentle restraint at first, then with growing passion as he pulled her closer. When they finally parted, both breathless, his eyes shone with an emotion that made Willa's heart soar. Marry me, he whispered against her lips. Come live with me on my new land. We'll build something wonderful together. Yes, Willa answered without hesitation. Yes, I will. Their courtship had been brief by conventional standards, but neither Wade nor Willa saw any reason for a long engagement. 3 weeks after his proposal, they were married in Laredo's small church, with the Hollisters standing as witnesses. Willa wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved in lavender for just such an occasion, and Wade cut a handsome figure in a new suit ordered from San Antonio. The ceremony was simple but moving, and when the minister pronounced them man and wife, Willa felt a surge of happiness so intense it brought tears to her eyes. Wade's kiss was tender and filled with promise, and the small gathering of well-wishers, hotel guests, shopkeepers, and a few townspeople who had come to know Willa over the years applauded their union with genuine warmth. The Hollisters hosted a modest reception at the hotel, where Mr. Hollister gave a surprisingly emotional toast to the couple. When Willa first came to work for us, she was a sad-eyed girl who'd lost everything, he said, raising his glass. Today I see a woman who's found her place in the world. Coleman, you're a lucky man, don't you forget it. Wade's arm tightened around Willa's waist. I never will, he promised. That night, as Wade's wagon carried them to their new home, a simple but sturdy cabin he had hastily constructed on his property, Willa felt both nervous and exhilarated. The intimacies of marriage were known to her only through clinical knowledge and whispered conversations among married women, but she trusted Wade completely. Her trust was well placed. Wade was a gentle and considerate lover, guiding her through the initial discomfort with patience and tenderness until pleasure replaced pain. In his arms, Willa discovered a new dimension of their connection, one that bound them together in the most fundamental way. Afterward, as they lay tangled in the sheets, Wade traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. Happy, Mrs. Coleman, Willa smiled against his chest, more than I ever thought possible. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity as they settled into their new life together. The cabin was sparsely furnished, but Wade had ensured the essentials were in place. A sturdy bed, a kitchen table with chairs, a comfortable sofa near the fireplace, and bookshelves that Willa soon filled with medical texts salvaged from her father's collection. Wade spent his days working the land, planning for the livestock he would eventually acquire, and expanding their home room by room. Willa established a vegetable garden, learned to manage their household accounts, and began to treat minor ailments for the scattered neighbors within riding distance. Word of her skills spread quickly, and soon she found herself with a steady stream of patients seeking her care. You should set up a proper examination room, Wade suggested one evening as Willa soaked her tired feet after a long day that had included delivering a neighbor's baby. That back bedroom we're adding would be perfect, Willa looked up in surprise. You wouldn't mind having sick people coming to our home, Wade knelt before her, taking her hands in his. Willa, your healing is part of who you are. I'd never ask you to set that aside. Tears pricked at her eyes. Most men wouldn't understand. I'm not most men, he replied with a smile, leaning in to kiss her softly. And you, my love, are certainly not most women. By the autumn of 1873, the Coleman Ranch was taking shape. Wade had purchased a small herd of cattle and half a dozen horses, hired 2 ranch hands to help with the expanding operation, and completed the addition to their home that now housed Willa's medical practice. They had settled into a rhythm of work and companionship that brought fulfillment to them both. Yet, as Christmas approached, Willa found herself confronting unexpected feelings of melancholy. The holiday season brought families together, and throughout Laredo, preparations were underway for celebrations centered around children and their wonder. Though Willa had accepted the reality of their childless marriage, the ache of what might have been occasionally surfaced at unexpected moments. Wade, ever attuned to her moods, found her one afternoon sitting alone on their porch, staring at the distant horizon with unseeing eyes. "A penny for your thoughts," he asked, settling beside her. Willa attempted a smile. "They're hardly worth that much." Wade took her hand, his thumb rubbing gentle circles on her palm. "Tell me anyway," she hesitated, not wanting to cause him pain. "It's nothing, really, just the holidays making me a bit sentimental." "About children," Wade said quietly, voicing what she wouldn't. "It's all right to feel that loss, Willa. I feel it too." The simple acknowledgement broke something open inside her, and tears welled in her eyes. "I'm sorry. I don't regret our marriage, not for a moment. It's just, you don't need to explain." Wade pulled her into his arms, holding her as she finally released the grief she'd been trying to suppress. "I wish I could give you everything your heart desires." When her tears subsided, Willa pulled back to look into his face. "You've given me more than I ever dreamed possible, Wade. A home, a purpose, love I never thought I'd find." She touched his cheek, wiping away a tear he hadn't realized had fallen. "I cannot give you children," he confessed. She touched the cowboy's face and said, "You've given me love." Wade's arms tightened around her, and he buried his face in her hair. They sat entwined as the sun set over their land, two hearts beating as one despite the wounds life had inflicted. The next morning, Wade was unusually secretive, disappearing after breakfast with a cryptic comment about errands in town. Willa busied herself with her patients, trying not to dwell on the emotional conversation of the previous day. When Wade returned late in the afternoon, his expression was unreadable. "I need to show you something," he said, offering his hand. "Will you come for a ride with me?" Puzzled but intrigued, Willa allowed him to help her into their wagon. They traveled for about 20 minutes, following the creek that bordered their property until they came to a small rise overlooking a meadow sheltered by cottonwood trees. "What do you think of this spot?" Wade asked as he helped her down from the wagon. Willa surveyed the area. It was beautiful, protected from the worst of the winds by the rise behind it, with good water access and plenty of flat ground. "It's lovely," she replied. "But what are we doing here?" Wade took both her hands in his expression serious yet filled with an underlying excitement. "I've been thinking about what you said last night, about the many ways to build a family." He took a deep breath. "There's an orphan train coming through San Antonio next month, children from back east who need homes and families to love them." Willa's heart began to race. "Wade, are you saying?" "I'm saying we have the means and the love to offer a home to children who have neither." His eyes searched hers. "If you're willing, I thought we might build a house here, a big one, with plenty of rooms for children who need a mother with your gentle hands, and a father who'd move heaven and earth to give them a good life." Tears filled Willa's eyes, but this time they were tears of joy. "How many are you thinking?" A slow smile spread across Wade's face. "How many do you want? 2, 3? Willa's mind raced with possibilities. "Maybe more, eventually," Wade laughed, pulling her into his arms. "We have the land, the resources, and God knows, enough love to share." He grew serious again. "It won't be the same as having our own by blood, but it will be better," Willa interrupted fiercely, "because these children will know they were chosen, wanted, that we saw them and decided they belonged with us." Wade's eyes shone with emotion. "So you'll come with me to San Antonio? Try and stop me," Willa replied, rising on tiptoes to kiss him. As they stood together in the meadow that would soon become the site of their family home, Willa felt a sense of rightness settle over her. The path she and Wade had traveled was not the one either of them had envisioned for themselves, but it had led them here to each other, and to the threshold of a new adventure filled with promise. The orphan train arrived in San Antonio on a crisp January morning in 1874. Wade and Willa had traveled to the city the day before, staying at a respectable hotel near the station. They had spent the evening discussing what kind of child they hoped to adopt, boy or girl. What age, but ultimately agreed that the connection they felt would be the deciding factor rather than any preconceived notions. The station platform was crowded with prospective parents, some clearly affluent, others modest farming families. Willa clutched Wade's hand nervously as the train pulled in, billowing steam into the cold air. A harried-looking woman in a severe black dress descended first, consulting a clipboard as she directed the children to form a line on the platform. They emerged one by one, children of various ages, from toddlers to teenagers, all wearing identical expressions of apprehension and forced bravery that broke Willa's heart. Most were thin and pale, their clothes clean but worn. Each child carried a small bundle containing their worldly possessions. "Ladies and gentlemen," announced the woman in black, who introduced herself as Miss Pemberton from the New York Children's Aid Society. "These children are in need of good Christian homes. They have been instructed in basic education and moral principles, and are capable of contributing to your households through appropriate labor. You may speak with them individually, and if there is mutual agreement, the necessary papers can be signed immediately." The prospective parents surged forward, and Willa felt a moment of panic at the mercenary nature of the proceedings. These were children, not livestock at auction. Wade squeezed her hand reassuringly, and they moved more slowly through the crowd, observing rather than immediately approaching any of the children. Near the end of the line stood a boy of about 8, his posture rigidly straight, as if bracing himself against disappointment. Unlike the other children who looked hopefully at the adults circulating among them, this boy stared fixedly ahead, his expression carefully blank. A smaller child, a girl perhaps 5 years old, clung to his hand, partially hidden behind his thin frame. Something about the pair drew Willa forward. As she approached, the boy's eyes flicked toward her, assessing and wary. They were unusual eyes, one blue and one hazel, set in a face that would be handsome once it lost its hollow, pinched quality. "Hello," Willa said gently. "My name is Willa Coleman. This is my husband, Wade." The boy nodded stiffly. "Madam, sir, what's your name?" Wade asked, crouching to the boy's level despite his height making it an awkward position. "Thomas Miller. This is my sister, Emma." He nudged the little girl forward slightly. She peered at them with enormous brown eyes, her thumb firmly in her mouth. "It's very nice to meet you both," Willa said, smiling at Emma, who ducked back behind her brother. "How long have you been traveling?" "3 days, madam," Thomas answered. His voice was carefully polite, but Willa could sense the tension in his small body, the way he positioned himself protectively in front of his sister. "That's a long journey," Wade commented. "You must be tired." Thomas shrugged. "We're fine, sir." Miss Pemberton appeared at Willa's elbow. "Ah, I see you've met the Miller children. Thomas is a bright boy, good with figures and reading. The little one doesn't speak much, I'm afraid. Their mother died of consumption last year, father unknown." She lowered her voice. "Most families prefer to take one child, of course, but we wouldn't separate siblings," Wade interrupted firmly. Miss Pemberton looked surprised, then pleased. "Well, that's commendable, Mr. Coleman. Would you like to speak with the children privately?" Wade looked at Willa, who nodded. They were shown to a small office inside the station, where Thomas stood at attention while Emma pressed against his side, watching the adults with wary eyes. "Thomas," Willa began gently, "we live on a ranch near Laredo. We have horses and cattle and a creek for fishing. I work as a healer for people in the area, and Wade manages our land." "What would we have to do?" Thomas asked bluntly. "What kind of work?" Willa and Wade exchanged glances, taken aback by the question but understanding its origin. Many families sought orphans primarily as free labor. "Well," Wade said slowly, "there are always chores on a ranch: feeding chickens, gathering eggs, helping with the garden. But there would be school too, books to read, time to play." Thomas looked skeptical. "Together, me and Emma stay together, of course," Willa assured him. You'd have your own rooms right next to each other in our house. We'd never separate you. Why do you want kids? Thomas's direct question caught them off guard. Why don't you have your own? A painful silence followed, broken by Wade's honest answer. We can't have children of our own. I was wounded in the war. He met Thomas's eyes. But we have a good home, plenty of food, and we've been hoping to find children who need a family as much as we need them. Thomas studied Wade's face, seeming to search for deception. Whatever he saw must have satisfied him because he gave a short nod. Emma has nightmares sometimes, she cries. That's all right, Willa said softly. Everyone has bad dreams occasionally. And she doesn't talk much, not since Mama died. Thomas's voice wavered slightly. The ladies at the orphanage said she's simple, but she's not. She understands everything. Willa's heart constricted at the fierce protectiveness in his voice. I believe you, Thomas. Sometimes people are quiet because they're thinking deeply, not because they don't have thoughts. For the first time, a flicker of something like hope crossed Thomas's face. He looked down at his sister. What do you think, Em? Would you like to live on a ranch, with horses? To everyone's surprise, Emma took her thumb from her mouth and spoke in a small, clear voice. Can I have a pony? Wade laughed, the tension in the room dissolving. I think we might arrange that, Miss Emma. 2 hours later, the paperwork was complete. Thomas James Miller and Emma Rose Miller were officially placed in the care of Wade and Wilhelmina Coleman of Laredo, Texas, with the understanding that formal adoption proceedings would follow after a 6-month probationary period. As they left the station, Emma surprising everyone by slipping her tiny hand into Willa's, Thomas looked up at Wade with serious eyes. Are we Colemans now, or still Millers? Wade considered the question with the gravity it deserved. That's for you to decide when you're ready. For now, you're Thomas and Emma, and you're coming home with us. The rest we can figure out together. The journey back to Laredo was filled with small revelations. Emma, having broken her silence, proved to be a curious child full of questions about their new home. Thomas remained more reserved, but his vigilance gradually relaxed as the miles passed, and neither Wade nor Willa showed signs of regretting their decision. They stayed overnight in a small town halfway to Laredo, where the children experienced their first proper bath in months, and the luxury of clean, new clothes that Willa had purchased in San Antonio. At dinner, Thomas stared in disbelief at the abundant food placed before him, while Emma fell asleep at the table, her small body finally surrendering to exhaustion in the safety of Willa's arms. As Wade carried the sleeping child up to their hotel room, with Thomas following close behind, Willa felt a surge of protectiveness and love so powerful it brought tears to her eyes. These children, with their wounded hearts and wary eyes, had already claimed a place in her soul. Later, after the children were asleep in the adjoining room, Wade held Willa close in their bed. Are you happy, love? He whispered against her hair. Beyond words, Willa replied, her voice thick with emotion. They're perfect, Wade, perfectly themselves. It won't be easy, he cautioned. They've been through so much already. The best things rarely are easy, Willa said, turning in his arms to face him, but we'll figure it out together. As a family, Wade's eyes glistened in the dim light. A family, he echoed, the words sounding like a prayer on his lips. He kissed her then, a kiss filled with gratitude and promise. They reached home the following afternoon, the children wide-eyed as they took in the sprawling landscape of the Coleman ranch. The cabin, which had seemed spacious for two, now felt somewhat cramped for four, but Wade had already begun construction on the larger house at the meadow site. For now, they would make do, with Thomas taking the small second bedroom and Emma sleeping on a trundle bed in Willa's sewing room. It's just temporary, Wade explained as he showed Thomas his room. By summer, we'll have the new house finished with plenty of space for everyone. Thomas ran his hand over the quilt covering his bed, the first bed that had been his alone since leaving New York. This is fine, sir. Better than fine, Wade, he corrected gently. You can call me Wade for now if Pa doesn't feel right yet. Thomas nodded, relief evident in his relaxing shoulders. The first few weeks were a period of adjustment for all of them. Thomas and Emma followed Willa like shadows as she went about her daily tasks, afraid perhaps that she might disappear if they let her out of their sight. Wade found Thomas to be an eager helper with the ranch chores, the boy's quick mind absorbing everything from how to feed the chickens to the proper way to approach a horse. Emma blossomed under Willa's gentle care, her initial silence giving way to a steady stream of chatter as she helped in the garden or played with the rag doll Wade had purchased for her in San Antonio. She still had nightmares that left her crying and inconsolable, but gradually came to accept comfort from Willa, allowing herself to be rocked back to sleep with whispered assurances that she was safe, loved, home. Thomas's trust came more slowly. He watched Wade and Willa with careful eyes, waiting for the moment when their kindness would falter or their patience would snap. When weeks passed without harsh words or raised hands, he began to relax incrementally, even smiling occasionally at Wade's terrible jokes or Willa's stories about her childhood. Spring arrived, bringing new growth to the land and to their fledgling family. Wade worked from dawn until dusk on the new house, determined to have it ready before the summer heat made construction unbearable. Thomas proved to be an able assistant, proudly learning to use a hammer and saw under Wade's patient tutelage. Willa's medical practice continued to flourish, with patients traveling considerable distances to seek her care. She began teaching Thomas and Emma basic reading and arithmetic in the evenings, discovering that Thomas had a natural aptitude for mathematics, while Emma showed a surprising talent for memorizing poems and songs. One evening in late April, as they sat on the porch after supper, Emma curled sleepily in Willa's lap and Thomas whittling a stick beside Wade. The boy looked up suddenly with a serious expression. "Miss Willa," he began, "are you and Wade going to have your own babies someday?" The question hung in the air, laden with unspoken fears. Willa met Wade's eyes over Emma's head, seeing his slight nod of encouragement. "No, Thomas," she answered honestly. "Wade was injured in a way that means we can't have babies together." Thomas absorbed this information, his small face thoughtful. "So you won't send us away if you have your own kids." The vulnerability in his question made Willa's chest ache. "Thomas, look at me," she said softly. When he raised his eyes to hers, she continued, "You and Emma are our children now, not temporarily, not until something better comes along, forever. Even if we make mistakes," his voice was barely above a whisper, "or make you mad." Wade set aside his whittling knife and placed a gentle hand on Thomas's shoulder. "Son, all children make mistakes. All parents get angry sometimes, but family means you stick together no matter what. There is nothing you could do that would make us send you away." Thomas's eyes filled with tears that he tried valiantly to blink away. "Promise, we promise," Willa and Wade answered in unison. That night, for the first time, Thomas hugged them both before going to bed, a quick, fierce embrace that spoke more eloquently than words. The new house was completed in June, a sprawling structure of local limestone with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides and plenty of windows to catch the breeze. It had 4 bedrooms upstairs, one for Willa and Wade, one each for Thomas and Emma, and a guest room plus Willa's examination room, a formal parlor, dining room, and spacious kitchen downstairs. Moving day was a celebration. The children ran from room to room, marveling at the space and the simple but sturdy furniture Wade had either built or purchased. Emma was particularly enchanted with her bedroom, which Willa had decorated with a colorful quilt and curtains, a small bookshelf, and a rocking chair just the right size for a 5-year-old. "It's like a princess room," she breathed, touching the quilt reverently. Thomas, meanwhile, could hardly believe that the room with the desk and the shelf for his growing collection of rocks, feathers, and interesting sticks was really his. "Forever?" he asked, still seeking reassurance. "Forever," Wade confirmed. That night, After the children were asleep in their new rooms, Wade and Willa stood on the porch, his arm around her waist as they gazed at the star-filled Texas sky. "Did you ever imagine we'd come this far when you were stitching up my sorry hide at the Hollister Hotel?" Wade asked, his voice teasing but his eyes serious. Willa leaned into his solid warmth. "I knew you were trouble the moment I laid eyes on you, Wade Coleman. The best kind of trouble," he murmured, bending to kiss her. "The very best," she agreed when they parted, breathless and smiling. The formal adoption was finalized in July 1874, 6 months after Thomas and Emma had joined their household. The judge in Laredo, impressed by the children's obvious well-being and the Colemans' commitment, signed the papers with a flourish and offered his congratulations. "Thomas and Emma Coleman," Wade said as they left the courthouse, testing the sound of their new legal names. "Has a nice ring to it, doesn't it?" Thomas nodded, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Yes, sir, I mean, Pa, it does." It was the first time he had used the title, and Wade's eyes misted over as he squeezed the boy's shoulder. "That it does, son, that it does." By the fall of 1874, the Coleman Ranch was thriving. Wade's cattle herd had expanded, and he had begun breeding horses as well, with an eye toward establishing a reputation for quality stock. Willa's medical practice had grown to the point where she now had regular office hours 3 days a week, with emergencies attended to as needed. Thomas had started attending the small school in Laredo, riding in each day with Emma on his pony while Wade, or one of the ranch hands, escorted them. At 8, he was already showing promise as a horseman and had a keen interest in the business side of ranching, often sitting with Wade in the evenings as he went over accounts. Emma, now 6, had overcome most of her night terrors and had blossomed into a sunny child with a vivid imagination and a remarkable gift for connecting with animals. Even the most fractious of Wade's horses would stand quietly for her small hands, and she had adopted a succession of injured wildlife that she nursed back to health with Willa's guidance. Life settled into a rhythm of work and play, challenges and joys. There were difficult days, of course, times when Thomas's anger over his past losses erupted in defiance, or when Emma retreated into silence after a triggering event. But Wade and Willa faced these storms together, with patience and unwavering love, and gradually the children's wounds began to heal. On Christmas Eve of 1874, nearly a year after they had brought the children home, Willa sat by the fire watching her family. Wade was on the floor with Emma, helping her arrange the carved nativity figures he had made as her gift. Thomas was curled in the big armchair, reading the new book of Greek myths Willa had ordered from San Antonio. The room was warm, fragrant with pine from the tree they had decorated that morning, and filled with a contentment so profound it brought tears to Willa's eyes. Wade looked up, catching her emotional gaze. "All right, love?" he asked softly. "Perfect," Willa replied, her heart too full for more elaborate words. Later that night, after the children had hung their stockings and been tucked into bed with promises that Santa would indeed find their new home, Wade and Willa retired to their room. As they prepared for bed, Wade pulled Willa into his arms, his expression unusually serious. "I've been thinking," he began. "A dangerous pastime," Willa teased, resting her hands against his chest. Wade smiled briefly before continuing. "I've been thinking about what you said the day I told you I couldn't give you children, about there being many ways to build a family." Willa nodded, curious about where his thoughts were leading. "The ranch is doing well better than I expected, honestly. The new house has plenty of room, and there are so many children who need homes." He searched her face. "What would you think about expanding our family again?" "Not right away, but perhaps in the spring," Willa's heart leapt at the suggestion. "You want to adopt more children, if you do," Wade said. "Thomas and Emma have brought us so much joy, and we have more to give, I think." "Yes," Willa answered without hesitation. "Yes, I would love that." Wade's expression softened with relief and happiness. I thought perhaps an older child this time, one who might otherwise be passed over. Willa rose on tiptoes to kiss him, overcome with love for this man who shared her heart so completely. You, Wade Coleman, are the best man I have ever known. I'm the luckiest, certainly, he murmured against her lips before deepening the kiss. In April of 1875, they traveled again to meet an orphan train, this time with Thomas and Emma in tow. The children were full of excitement about gaining a new sibling, though Thomas had solemnly extracted a promise that he would remain the eldest no matter who joined their family. This time, the child who caught their attention was a serious-faced girl of 12 named Sarah, who stood apart from the others with a book clutched to her chest like armor. She had been returned twice by families who found her too bookish and insufficiently helpful, according to Miss Pemberton's apologetic explanation. When Willa approached and asked what she was reading, the girl's wary expression gave way to cautious animation as she showed her tattered copy of Little Women. Learning that Willa had not only read the book, but owned a copy at home, created an immediate bond between them. Sarah fit seamlessly into their household, her initial reserve melting when she discovered Willa's medical books and Wade's willingness to discuss the ideas she encountered in her reading. She formed a protective attachment to Emma, who adored her new big sister, and developed an unexpected interest in horses that gave her common ground with Thomas. The following year brought 10-year-old twins, Michael and Matthew, whose mischievous energy and mechanical aptitudes soon had them trailing after Wade as he worked on farm equipment or constructed new outbuildings for their expanding operation. The boys had been shuttled between relatives after their parents died in a tenement fire, ending up on the orphan train when the last relation could no longer feed them. By 1880, the Coleman family numbered 9: Wade and Willa Thomas, now 15, Sarah, 17, the twins 14, Emma 11, and the latest additions. 8-year-old Grace, rescued from an abusive situation in Laredo itself, and 3-year-old Benjamin, the son of a young woman who had died in childbirth under Willa's care, his father unknown. The ranch had grown correspondingly, with Wade employing several hands to manage the cattle and horse operations. Willa's medical practice had become official when she passed the newly instituted Texas medical examination, making her one of the first licensed female physicians in the state. They had added a schoolroom to the house, where the younger children received their education from a teacher who lived in a cottage on their property, while Thomas prepared to attend university in Austin and Sarah considered following Willa into medicine. Did you ever imagine this? Willa asked Wade one evening as they sat on their porch, watching their brood play an impromptu game of baseball in the yard. 7 children when we thought we'd have none. Wade's arm tightened around her shoulders. Not in my wildest dreams, but I wouldn't change a moment of it. Willa rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Nor would I, though I sometimes wonder what became of that quiet couple who thought they'd live peacefully in their little cabin. Wade laughed. Overwhelmed by blessings, I'd say. As they watched, Thomas hit the ball over the makeshift outfield, sending the twins scrambling after it while Emma cheered and little Benjamin toddled in circles, trying to follow the action. Sarah sat on the grass with Grace in her lap, patiently explaining the game to the still shy child who had been with them less than a year. We should tell them about the Johnsons' baby, Wade said after a moment. The one they're giving up for adoption. Willa sighed. I know we said Benjamin would be the last, that we're not getting any younger. And yet here we are, discussing number 8. Wade's voice held no reproach, only a fond understanding of his wife's boundless heart. The house is certainly big enough, Willa mused. And the older ones help so much with the little ones now. Wade turned her face toward his. Just say the word, love, and I'll talk to Johnson tomorrow. Willa's answer was a kiss that conveyed all the gratitude and love she felt for this man, who had given her a life fuller than any she could have imagined that day in Laredo when she had stitched his wounded side. The years passed. bringing changes both expected and surprising. Thomas attended university and returned to manage the ranch alongside Wade. Sarah became a midwife, practicing with Willa before establishing her own practice in the growing town of Laredo. The twins opened a successful blacksmith and wagon repair shop, their mechanical skills in high demand as the region developed. Emma, to everyone's surprise, became a schoolteacher, her gentle patience perfect for working with young children. Grace discovered a talent for art and eventually married a newspaperman from San Antonio, while Benjamin showed a gift for languages and traveled as far as New York and Europe before returning to Texas to teach. The Johnson baby, a girl they named Rebecca, grew into a capable young woman who took over management of the household as Willa and Wade aged, ensuring their comfort in their later years. And there were others who passed through their lives, foster children who stayed for months or years, before returning to recovered parents or moving on to opportunities elsewhere, each taking a piece of the Colemans' love with them. In the summer of 1903, 30 years after Wade had first ridden into Laredo with a knife wound in his side, he and Willa sat on the porch of their home watching their grandchildren play in the same yard where their children had once romped. At 70, Wade's hair was silver and his face weathered from decades under the Texas sun, but his eyes were as blue and clear as the day Willa had first met him. She, at 64, had kept her slender figure, though her chestnut hair was streaked with gray and laugh lines framed her eyes. "Do you regret any of it?" Wade asked suddenly, his hand finding hers as it had thousands of times over their years together. "Regret," Willa echoed, puzzled. "What would I regret, choosing a man who couldn't give you children of your own blood?" His voice held a hint of the old insecurity, rarely surfaced but never completely vanquished. Willa turned to face him, taking his weathered face between her hands as she had that long ago evening when he'd first confessed his inability to father children. "Wade Coleman, look at this yard full of grandchildren, 23 at last count. Look at our 7 children, all grown and making their way in the world. How could I possibly regret the family we've built together?" Wade covered her hands with his own. "Not a day goes by that I don't thank God for bringing me to that hotel in Laredo. Even though I hurt you with my inexpert stitching," Willa teased. "Especially because of that," Wade replied with a smile. "Your inexpert stitching gave me an excuse to linger until I could convince you to take a chance on me." Willa laughed, the sound as joyful and clear as it had been in her youth. "As I recall, I didn't need much convincing." "No," Wade agreed, leaning forward to press his forehead against hers. "You saw past what I couldn't give to what I could. You gave me purpose when I was lost, love when I thought I didn't deserve it, and a family beyond anything I could have imagined. And you gave me everything I ever needed," Willa whispered, echoing the words she had spoken 3 decades earlier. "Your love was always enough. The rest was just grace overflowing." As the Texas twilight deepened around them, Wade drew Willa closer, their bodies fitting together with the familiar comfort of 2 souls who had weathered life's storms side by side. Around them, the sounds of their family children's laughter, adult conversations. The distant lowing of cattle created a symphony of the life they had built together from wounded beginnings. It was, they both knew, a far richer legacy than either of them could have created alone, this family bound not by blood but by choice, by love that had proven stronger than any limitation or loss. And as stars appeared in the darkening sky above their home, Wade and Willa Coleman gave thanks for the journey that had brought them to this place of abundance, surrounded by the living proof that sometimes life's greatest gifts arise from its deepest wounds.